Hey there, welcome to episode number 6 here in this series, all about recognizing narrative patterns and story designs throughout the Bible, narrative templates. If you're new to this series, I would highly recommend you watch the previous few episodes just to get a grip on what we're doing. If this video blesses you, this whole series, like this video and subscribe if this content blesses you. But again, this is a beginner's guide to recognizing and tracing story design patterns. And in this episode, we're going to continue walking through how to apply the connections we see and how do we draw wisdom out from the connections that we're making. Now, in this video, we're going to continue talking about the connections between Genesis 3 and Genesis chapter 4. We've already mapped out all those parallels and connections. Go watch the previous episodes to understand what I'm talking about. Now the question is, what do we do with this information? How do we apply it? What's the wisdom for our lives? So let's walk through each of these observations that we've already made. I've charted out all the data onto a spreadsheet, and hopefully this is going to be more unscripted, like I have nothing planned, but hopefully by the end of this, it will become much clearer when you make connections in the Bible, how to draw out wisdom, how to reflect on that, what that's supposed to prompt in you. We're not just supposed to make parallels and go, cool. We're supposed to think, okay, in my own life, in my own worldview, in the world around me, like how do I see this connection kind of playing out in real life, and how should I respond? So we're going to continue in verse 7. And again, this is verse 7 of chapter 4 with Cain and Abel. In both chapter 3 and chapter 4, there's the opportunity to do what is right. Right here, there's a word to obey. So in chapter 3, it's don't eat from that tree. In chapter 4, it's, hey, do what is right. It is always a response when we do the right thing. It is to be a response to the Word of God. It's not just some random feeling I have. There's something about the Word of God that should guide and prompt my decision-making and how I respond to people and how I interact. And so just be thinking about that. The next observation is there's the mention of the door. In chapter 3, the cherubim are guarding the way back to the tree of life. In chapter 4, it's the difference here is that sin is knocking at the door. And so in I think this gets picked up on in Revelation, where Jesus is knocking on the door. He says, ask, seek, and you knock, and then he'll also knock. And so there's this invitation to, I think in this context, there's a guarding aspect to both. The cherubim guard what is sacred. Cain's supposed to guard his heart and his own mind and his own, just well-being and emotional state from sin creeping in and beginning to affect his decisions. And I think that's a good way to think about sin in our life, or just the opportunity to do right or do wrong. That test is presented as like someone is knocking on your door. Who will you answer to? Kind of frames up the spiritual warfare conversation a bit differently, and how we respond to sin in our life. We're supposed to guard our hearts, like Proverbs says. There's a contrary desire in both Genesis 3 and 4. Eve has a contrary desire to her husband in chapter 3. In chapter 4, Cain is unfortunately being opposed by sin. Sin has a contrary desire. It's prowling, it's crouching, it's lurking, and it is not wanting what is good for Cain. And that's a good way to think about. That helps me reframe sin again, and the battle with temptation and the battle with the flesh. Is it someone knocking on my door? And if I know that voice, if I recognize the voice of truth there, the Spirit of God is at work, I should open. If not, I should guard what is sacred. And part of the way we do that is recognizing, being familiar with the voice that is knocking and prompting us to do something, because there's the voices competing for your attention that want to drive your life. And here, just to think about, sin's desire is to consume me. It is contrary to what is good for me. That helps me go, it'd be pretty stupid to do what is wrong here, because it's only going to bring harm to me. I think that's the wisdom, is it reframes, once again, the sin battle to help you kind of see it as something is trying to drag you down and those who you love and the world around you into darkness. By resisting that pull, you're actually submitting to God's ideal for your life, which is true abundant life, right? The idea of ruling is present in both chapter 3 and 4. Cain is called to rule over this sinful desire. Unfortunately, Eve will want to rule over her husband, but Adam will rule over her, and they're supposed to be ruling over creation, but there's going to be this battle, and that's unfortunately what sin will do. It's interesting. Cain is going to give himself over to the rule of sin and let sin rule his decision and action. And when that happens, relationships get tarnished, and the order of God's hierarchy and rule in the world gets mixed up, and it's not good. So that's another way to kind of frame up how sin wreaks havoc in my life. And again, this is just kind of letting the scriptures and these connection points kind of reframe and reshape the way I see the world and interact with the world. God is inviting us to rule over sin, just like Cain, by the Spirit, following the one who's conquered our sin, that being Jesus. And just by kind of understanding, when I give myself, this is the language Romans 6 uses. Don't give your body over to sin for its evil purposes. It wants to rule over you to kind of wreak havoc through you as a vessel. Don't let that happen. And that's a really strong application for me when it comes to my battle with sin. In verse 8, Cain is speaking to Abel in a field, and it becomes a mirror image of how chapter 3 opens, where the serpent, the beast of the field, is speaking to Eve, coming from the field. So the difference in chapter 4 is it's not a serpent, it's Cain playing the role of a serpent. So just to notice that development, oh, well, interesting. The serpent has, I wouldn't say taken over the vessel of Cain, but Cain is playing the role of the serpent and having characteristics of the serpent by dragging Abel into death and having this deceptive conversation out in the field. So for us, it's helpful just to consider that connection point and go, in what ways have I possibly given myself over to the ways of the serpent? In what ways is my life possibly characterized by the serpent? Because there is a development here. Now it's not just the serpent wreaking havoc, it's the sin, this entity taking over Cain to wreak havoc and bring other people down with him through his evil decisions. And that's what happens. You start to see these points of connection are telegraphing something for you to let you know that when you give into this voice, when you're given over, like it works out the same way it worked out for Cain. It's not going to be good. We're supposed to draw wisdom from this and go, I want to learn from my own life from these situations. There's a forbidden action in both stories. Chapter 3, it's eating from the tree. In chapter 4, it's him, ending his brother's life, right? So God is always trying to keep us away from what is forbidden, but human tendency is to be curious about what's forbidden, to kind of play around with that, to toe the line and be like, I'm really interested though. I want to explore that a bit. I'm not going to give myself over to it, but that fascination, that curiosity with what is forbidden should be brought to God and laid at his feet. That's the application, I think, is the forbiddenness of both stories is very obvious and makes me have to take inventory and say, in what way am I fascinated with what is forbidden? And how do I keep myself another step removed from that to not begin toying around with it? And I'm not touching it, right? I'm just looking at it, but I'm getting a little too close. The forbidden tree in Genesis 3 was an actual plant, but in chapter 4, the forbidden tree ends up being the life of Abel, which I kind of, for me, as I think on this and think about that connection point and that development, the difference almost, wow, what was forbidden can be what is of nature. Like you can give yourself over to idols that are made by human hands and give yourself over to demons in that sense, or just whatever, okay? But there's also the mankind aspect of there are certain things and interactions between other fellow humans that are also forbidden, right? Something that is forbidden is not just always an object, but it can be a specific action you take. That is forbidden. To kind of expand our categories of what is forbidden within Scripture and give us a better framework of, God is not just interested in you abstaining from certain things, but in certain dealings and interactions. Those are also forbidden that God is telling you to stay away from. God's response to human sin is the same as in chapter 3. He asks a question, which makes me, in my own battle with sin, I might be prompted to go, okay, if that's a consistency with God, maybe he's wanting me to take inventory, and he's asking me questions that I'm not really listening to right now because the voice of sin is just so loud and the volume's turned up. So maybe I need to turn my attention off sin to give myself over to the questioning of God. Like, God, what are you inviting me into to reflect on, to think about, to ask, to reframe how I'm seeing this temptation or this battle, to just listen to the voice of truth in that sense, in the Good Shepherd. In chapter 3, God invites Adam to step out, like, where are you, right? In chapter 4, he does the same thing for Cain. So just to go, that's another thing God does, is he invites people to step out of darkness into light. I want to take that invitation. Where in my life am I staying in the darkness when he's inviting me to come out and be honest and be sincere and just be open and vulnerable and humble? The difference with Adam and Cain is that Adam, he does come out. And Cain, he lies. He covers up his sin. That's a key difference in the story with these two main characters. So I might want to see myself in this story and go, am I more like Adam, where I'm quick to come out to the light and say, you know what, Lord, and confess my sin? Or do I kind of hide it and skirt it and justify it like Cain? And, well, am I my brother's keeper, you know? And to go another step further, maybe consider, where am I prone to be like Cain? And in what areas of my life is it easier for me to be more like Adam? Adam ends up answering with honesty. Cain answers with a question, as if to be in the position of God. You know what, God, let me ask you a question. And it's like, whoa, is that tendency in me to be like Cain and think I am entitled to God answering my question? Where does that come from? Where does that pride stem from? How do I stomp that out so that I don't know, end up playing a role God has not given me permission to? In chapter 4, Abel's the victim as the keeper of sheep. In chapter 3, Adam is the keeper of the garden, but he's not the victim. On one hand, I guess he is. Like, he fell prey to the deception of the serpent, but he also had a responsibility. He's culpable. He chose to act on that misinformation. So just to think about the reversal of roles here, the keeper in chapter 4 is the victim. The keeper in chapter 3 is more of the criminal. I think it's easy to victimize ourselves and I didn't. It's like, you're accountable. You knew what the right thing to do was. I don't know why this is in red. I think because I had this highlighted from a previous video. God asks Cain the exact same question he asked Eve in chapter 3. What have you done? Right? God accuses the serpent, and I don't want to be thinking about that. In this story, Cain is questioned, but he's also accused. So Cain is in the role of Eve and in the role of the serpent. So I just want to be thinking of, like, in my own life, have I seen that play out? Not that God accuses his people. It's not condemning. It's not shameful. But where have I found myself being like Eve, or God's inviting me to step out and he's like, hey, what'd you do? And then when it comes to, the serpent and Cain being accused of rebellious sin, like, that's God exposing what went wrong and what is evil, and God will convict us by his Spirit, which is to convince us we've done something wrong and it's atoned for, we're forgiven, but to reflect on that so that we can learn and for the next opportunity actually be wise and do what is right. So that question of what have you done helps me to think of God as like wanting people to think through their decisions, not just before, not just during, but on the other side of it. We see the voice in both stories. In chapter 3, they hear God's voice and run and hide. In chapter 4, Abel's voice is crying out for justice, for vengeance, really. And God's voice is what brings the judgment now. the voice that brings judgment can be a human voice. So just to see that development, like God's voice brought judgment in both stories, but now there's a human paired with that and involved in that crying out for justice. So to think of in my own life, where is that desire for justice in me? How is that expressed? What are the cries I see? How am I answering the cries of others? It just gets me to think about justice and really partnering with God in Him bringing judgment to the earth. Judgment's not always bad. It's a decision being made. How am I doing that? How am I partnering with God in bringing justice to this world? In verse 10, instead of Adam and Eve hiding and covering themselves, Cain appears to have hidden the body. There's a dimension of hiding, right? Sin always has this dimension of secrecy and hiddenness and not disclosing and hiding in the darkness. And where is that tendency in me? Do I find myself... Cain's hiding is a step up from Adam and Eve's hiding. They're hiding, but he's hiding what he did, as well as like covering it up with like questioning and kind of lying. So there's layers to this. In what ways do I find myself hiding and not giving myself completely over to God and thinking He doesn't know, In verse 10, God says the blood is crying from the ground. Just like God told Adam in chapter 3, He'll return to the ground. So seeing the ground play a different role in both stories. Death comes through the guilty party. Now the criminals being sentenced to death now it's not the criminal being sentenced to death, but the innocent, right? So death seems to plague both. Just a reflection, maybe for me, on how death operates in the world, whether through the guilty or through the innocent or for the innocent or for the guilty. And where in my life, am I possibly being an agent of death? Because sin brings death. Where I give myself over to sin, inevitably some characteristic, some dimension of death is prone to follow. One of the key differences in this story is the presence of blood. And that just, I think, is supposed to prompt in me a deeper appreciation, value, and it's supposed to make me view human life as more precious. Life is precious to God. Is it precious to me? I should be reflecting on that, because that's a point in both stories. I want to see how much time we have left so I don't go too over. Yeah, we're doing good. Let's keep going. We'll probably end at verse 11. The combination of curse and ground is evident in both stories. In this story, Cain is cursed from the ground. In chapter 3, the ground was cursed. And so just to think about the curse in that sense, like the curse that comes from sin can affect the world, but it can also, and it does, affect people, and it can actually use human vessels to perpetuate itself. That really brings a sobering perspective to sin and engaging in darkness on any level. I'm like partnering with the curse and sin when I give myself over to evil, even as a believer. Why would I do that? So a lot of this is just reframing certain things in my life. The combination of curse and ground is evident in both stories. In chapter 3, the ground is cursed because of what Adam did. Cain is cursed because of what he did. The ground here takes on another form of meaning. It's not just something to be cursed, but just be thinking about creation. Creation in some context, depending on how it's used or how it's exploited, it can be used for good or used for evil. It can stand as judgment against the wicked. It can also help and aid the righteous. Just to think about the ground, it's also, for me it prompts an awareness of my mortality. I want to end up in the ground, and I am going to be one with the ground in that sense, because I'm pulled up from the dust, and I'm going to return to the dust. So it just, I don't know, makes me think more about life and like the seriousness of every moment I've been given by God. There's a mouth being opened in both stories to eat. It just makes me think like, man, just the appetites of the flesh, the consumption of sin wants to consume endlessly and use me as a vessel to do that. And that's why I have fleshly appetites. And to think through that, like, I don't need to satisfy the cravings of my flesh and the appetites. And I want to eat like Eve and Adam, who say, I want to be like God and I'll eat the fruit. And the ground drinks the blood, opens its mouth. And just to be thinking through, like, man, that's a really vivid image of like the blood being consumed by the ground. And I think it brings a different perspective to any kind of mistreatment of people I engage in. Whenever I mistreat people in a sinful way, it's like I'm giving myself over to be eaten by this monster of sin. Of course, still being a believer and all, but that seems to be like the vivid image that should be in our minds, and I'm giving other people over to be consumed, and the consequences of sin, you might say, maybe not sin itself, but the consequences eat people, including myself, up. The forbidden act here is done with the hands, right? I just want to be thinking about, what am I doing with my hands lately? Eve took the fruit, Cain took the life. It just shows the potential of these hands to do such evil, but also to do such good. When I surrender these hands and my efforts and my works to God, my gifts, my abilities, anything I have in my hands, there's a consequence for Cain involving difficulty in labor. Just makes me think about how I think about labor. What should my view of labor be in this life? It's not bad, but there is a kind of labor I'm made for it that I don't always engage in. And now Adam, unfortunately, that's going to be harder for him because there's thorns. And now Cain's exiled from the ground, and the ground won't yield to him its help. And I just want to be thinking like, wow, in what areas of my life could I also be aided by the world God's provided? And what kind of work should I be laboring in, you know? And then we'll end here. In both stories, something is given by the hand. Again, here's the potential for the hand to do good or bad, but also to encourage other people to do good or bad. Eve gives the fruit to Adam with her hands. Cain takes the life of Abel with his. Like, the hands have such potential to do evil and wickedness, but also, on the flip side, such potential to glorify God and do what is good. So, in the next video, we will probably, and I say probably, but most likely we won't, we'll probably finish off this spreadsheet and all the other connections. But I hope this is helpful just to think through, like, yeah, we made connections, so what? Reflect on it. Think, how do I respond? What is this supposed to prompt in me? Hopefully you see the value and the benefit in making biblical connections like these, because it's almost like there's more witnesses to testify to a specific wisdom principle or truth in my life. And the more witnesses I have, hopefully the more weight that has in my life to do the right thing and all that stuff. All right. So be sure to take advantage of our weekly Bible reading plan. Check our Genesis teachings on Thursday. Check out our Monday teachings in Matthew. Check out our Scripture Creatures at thescripturecreatures.com, which is a Bible trading card resource for children. Teach them the Bible and teach them how to read the Bible, just like this, all right? And then Thursdays, we have a conversation at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on our Discord server. And I think that's it. Like this video, leave an encouraging comment. Lets me know what's working and what's helpful to you. And I'll see you guys in the next video.